Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Thursday morning, November 3rd. A lot going on in the world of weather. We have the tropical season still alive and kicking in the Atlantic Basin. At the same time, colder and colder air masses are showing up on the North America weather map here. We have a lot of cold air over western Canada into the western U.S., and there certainly looks like there'll maybe a pattern flip by the time we get to the middle of November. It looks like a warm weather pattern for the next 7 to 10 days or so in the eastern half of the nation. But again, that could flip right around the middle of November with colder air masses being able to penetrate into the central and eastern U.S. by the middle of November. Let's talk first about the tropical situation, and we'll also focus in on the temperature pattern over the next couple of weeks. Here we are in the early part of November. We have a tropical storm, Lisa, over Central America. It moved in the last 24 hours, made landfall in Belize, and will likely end up right in this region right here, back out over the waters of the Bay of Campeche. Now, having said that, intensification is not all that likely because it's in an area of pretty strong wind shear. So yes, it has moved over land and could re-emerge out over the waters of the Bay of Campeche, but intensification again is not all that likely given strong winds in the upper part of the atmosphere, but we'll certainly monitor that. Meanwhile, way up here in the North Atlantic, Hurricane Martin looks like it'll head ultimately to the east and may eventually have an impact on the United Kingdom over the next several days. It will become a powerful extratropical type of storm system over the North Atlantic over the next few days. There is another tropical wave right here just to the east of Bermuda. Bermuda is this little dot right here. But the area of interest, in my opinion, is right in this region right here. Nothing is showing up right now, but I believe this is where we'll see a tropical system over the next week to 10 days or so, probably heading in this fashion, and it certainly can impact the southeastern coastline, really anywhere from Florida to the Carolinas. Ultimately, a lot of that moisture could ride right up along the eastern seaboard. So still a lot going on in the Atlantic Basin. Certainly it looks active for the next at least 1 to 2 weeks. Well, let's take a look at a teleconnection known as the EPO, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation. This kind of can give us a clue about the temperature pattern over the next couple of weeks. When the EPO moves from positive territory, which it resides in right now, into negative territory, that tends to correlate with a temperature change pattern in North America that allows for or transitions to colder air masses making their way into the central and eastern U.S. And indeed, that is what the forecast is predicting here from the European ensemble run of a few days ago, in positive territory, but then drops into negative territory for much of the second week of November into the middle of the month. And again, an EPO transition from positive to negative generally correlates with high pressure ridging setting up over Alaska and the northeastern part of the Pacific, and a trough starting to form over the central part of Canada, maybe the central part of U.S. into the east, and that could coincide here with a transition from a warm next 7 to 10 days or so to a colder pattern into the central and eastern states by the middle part of November. Well, let's take a look at last night's 0Z run of the GFS. We're looking at a broader view here than normal view of North America at the 850 millibar temperature anomalies. Warm, quite warm over the eastern half of the nation. Cold, quite cold over the western part of the nation, and a strong front right in between here as we begin the day on Thursday. We've talked about this particular frontal system right here as possibly producing some severe weather on Friday into Saturday in the central part of the nation, Texas, Oklahoma, for example, with colder than normal air to the west and warmer than normal air into the east. It looks like high temperatures, for example, in D.C., Philadelphia, New York City could flirt with the 70-degree mark on Friday and Saturday, but much colder air exists in that time period out across the western part of the nation, really from Alaska down across the western part of the U.S. Now let's move forward here, and again, the pattern tends to stay warmer than normal in the eastern half of the nation right through the upcoming weekend, but a lot of cold air showing up on the weather map here in southwestern Canada, the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. This is way below normal air here by the time we get into the early part of next week, but still warmer than normal in much of the eastern half of the nation. Then we talked about that EPO as a teleconnection index that kind of gives us a signal that the temperature pattern could have a significant flip by by around the middle of the month. Here we are now about a week away from right now, November 10th, next Thursday. Still very warm conditions across the eastern part of the nation, the eastern half of Canada as well, but colder than normal conditions from southwestern Canada down across the southwestern states in the U.S. And then with that EPO giving us a signal, looks like the colder air masses will have more and more of an ability to slide into the eastern part of the nation. Here we are almost 2 weeks out now, and colder air mass starting to show up by the time we get to about 2 weeks from now. We're looking at, in this particular forecast map, around Wednesday, November 16th. So that's 2 weeks from yesterday. Once the cold air starts to have the ability to move into the central U.S., it certainly can stick around for a while, and this is what the GFS model run is showing for all the way out to the latter part of the third week of November. Well, let's take a look at the surface forecast maps from last night's 0Z run of the GFS. And again, we start off with moisture down across Central America associated with tropical storm Lisa that could end up over the Bay of Campeche here over the next 12 to 24 hours or so. Now let's move forward. We have strong high pressure dominating the eastern third of the nation, above normal temperatures for the most part in the east. A lot of cold air out across the west, even some snow here over the Rockies over the next 24 hours or so. Let's move forward here, and the moisture associated with Lisa tends to dissipate again. A lot of shear in that region, but then we start looking this part, the southwestern Atlantic, by the time we get to the latter part of the upcoming weekend. And notice GFS is starting to show some significant rainfall over the southwestern part of the Atlantic by the end of the upcoming weekend. And then we start to see kind of a surface low, a tropical, most likely a tropical, could be a subtropical type of low here by the early part of next week. And again, this is the area that we'll have to watch over the next 7 days or so, the next week to 10 days or so. Again, there could be a new tropical system that forms and heads towards Carolina coast all the way down to potentially the Florida coastline, and ultimately that moisture could ride up along the eastern seaboard. Here we start to see some moisture riding up along the eastern seaboard. At the same time, some colder air is starting to dive down into the central part of the U.S. This is the end of next week we're looking at right here, the Friday forecast from November 11th. That's a week from tomorrow. So again, this potentially could be tropical moisture associated with a tropical system that ultimately rides up along the eastern seaboard. At the same time, colder air is plunging to the south from central Canada into the central part of the U.S. with that temperature pattern flip. And again, we've talked about this time of the year where there's often kind of a very interesting transition between the last gasp of the Atlantic Basin tropical season. At the same time, colder and colder air masses are plunging into the U.S. from Canada, often a very interesting time of the year. And this is what the potential is for the end of next week. Tropical moisture riding up in a warm environment along the eastern seaboard. At the same time, winter-like cold air pouring down from Canada into the central U.S. So very interesting weather pattern setting up for the next couple of weeks. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.